The sound of gunfire echoed through the dusty streets of Willow Creek as Penelope Bennett ducked behind a water trough, her heart pounding against her ribs. It wasn't the first time she'd been caught in the crossfire of a saloon brawl turned deadly. But today, she carried more than just her own safety in her trembling hands. She clutched a leather-bound medical bag that contained her life's work. The year was 1878, and Willow Creek was still a raw, untamed settlement in Wyoming Territory. Like many frontier towns, it had sprung up alongside the promise of gold, cattle, and new beginnings. For Penelope, a 30-year-old widow with medical training from back east, it represented her last chance at building a life of her own. "Mrs. Bennett, get inside now," Sheriff Miller called out, his weathered face creased with concern as he fired another warning shot into the air. Penelope gathered her skirts and made a dash for her small clinic, the wooden sign above the door still fresh with paint. P. Bennett Medical Services. She'd been in Willow Creek for just 6 months, long enough to establish herself as someone who could stitch a wound, set a bone, or deliver a baby, but not long enough to escape the whispers that followed her through town. Once inside, she bolted the door and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. Her clinic was modest but meticulously organized. Shelves of labeled tonics and remedies, a small examination table, and in the corner, a rocking chair she sometimes sat in during quiet moments, dreaming of what might have been. "Penny, you all right in there?" Came a familiar voice, followed by a gentle knock. "Yes, Martha, I'm fine," Penelope called out, unbolting the door to let in her only true friend in town. Martha Wilson, the shopkeeper's wife, bustled in with a basket covered by a checkered cloth. "Brought you some fresh bread and preserves. Figured you'd forget to eat again." Her kind eyes swept over Penelope's slim frame. "You're wasting away, dear." "Just busy," Penelope said, setting her medical bag down and removing her bonnet. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a sensible bun, though a few stubborn strands had escaped during her dash to safety. Martha's expression softened. "The Miller's baby came last night. Healthy boy, 8 pounds. Penelope's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's wonderful news." Sarah Davis was there, of course, running her mouth as usual. Martha hesitated. "Said some unkind things." "Let me guess," Penelope said, unpacking her medical supplies with practiced efficiency. "How can a barren woman possibly know how to deliver a child?" "How can I understand a mother's pain when I've never been one myself?" Martha nodded sadly. "Something like that. I told her to hush, that you studied with real doctors back east." Penelope's hands stilled on a roll of bandages. After 8 years of marriage to her late husband Edward, they'd never been blessed with children. It wasn't for lack of trying or medical intervention. The doctors had eventually told her she would never conceive, a fact that had first devastated her, then shaped the course of her life. She'd thrown herself into medical studies, determined to help others even if she couldn't have a family of her own. "People will always talk, Martha," Penelope said finally. "I've learned to live with it." But the truth was, the whispers cut deep. In a frontier town where a woman's worth was often measured by her ability to bear children, Penelope was seen as somehow less. Incomplete. It didn't matter that she'd saved lives or that she'd come west alone after Edward's death, braving dangers that would make most men hesitate. "There's a cattle drive coming through next week," Martha said, changing the subject. "The Bar Y outfit means more work for you, I imagine. Cowboys always getting themselves shot or stabbed or falling off horses." Penelope nodded, grateful for the distraction. "I'll stock up on whiskey and suture thread." After Martha left, Penelope moved to the small window that overlooked the main street. The commotion had died down, though a crowd still lingered outside the saloon. She caught sight of Sarah Davis in her fine dress, laughing with a group of women, and felt a familiar ache in her chest. That night, as she prepared for bed in the small living quarters behind her clinic, Penelope opened her journal and wrote by lamplight, as she did every evening. Another day in Willow Creek. treated Mr. Peterson's gout, Timmy Wallace's broken wrist, and Mrs. Cole's persistent cough. The usual whispers followed me to the general store. I wonder if there will ever be a place where I am judged by my skills rather than my empty womb. Edward always said I would have made a wonderful mother. Perhaps that makes it harder knowing what might have been. She closed the journal and extinguished the lamp, unaware that life in Willow Creek was about to change dramatically with the arrival of the Bar Y cattle drive and its enigmatic trail boss. The following week brought the rumble of hooves and the bellowing of cattle as the Bar Y outfit arrived on the outskirts of town. Penelope was tending to young Emma Taylor's fever when the first riders came down Main Street. "Cowboys are here, Mrs. Bennett," Emma said excitedly, momentarily forgetting her illness. At 12, she was fascinated by the romantic notion of cowboys, having devoured dime novels borrowed from her older brother. Penelope smiled, placing a cool cloth on the girl's forehead. "Yes, and that means your father's general store will be busy. You focus on getting better so you can help him." When she left the Taylor home, Penelope saw the town had transformed. Cowboys in dust-covered clothes filled the streets, some heading straight for the saloon, others to the general store for supplies. Their trail boss, she heard someone say, was settling accounts with the cattle buyer. Penelope made her way back to her clinic, nodding politely to the strangers who tipped their hats. She was nearly at her door when she heard a commotion from the direction of the livery stable. "Get the doctor," someone shouted. "Man's been gored by a longhorn." Without hesitation, Penelope grabbed her medical bag and ran toward the sound. A crowd had gathered around the livery and she pushed through to find a man laid out on a horse blanket, blood soaking through his shirt. "I'm here," she announced, kneeling beside him. "Give me space." A tall cowboy with a stern face stepped forward. "You the doctor?" "I'm the closest thing Willow Creek has," Penelope replied, already cutting away the injured man's shirt to reveal a deep puncture wound in his side. The man on the ground was young, maybe 20, and his face had gone pale with blood loss. The wound was serious. The horn had missed vital organs but had torn through muscle and left a jagged hole that needed immediate attention. "Get him to my clinic," Penelope ordered. "Carefully." 4 cowboys lifted their comrade onto an improvised stretcher, following Penelope's brisk pace back to her clinic. The tall man who'd spoken before walked alongside her. "Name's Vaughn Yates," he said. "Trail boss for the Bar Y. That's Robbie, one of my drovers. Good kid." Penelope nodded, studying him briefly. Vaughn Yates was perhaps in his mid-30s, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the sun and sky. His eyes were a startling blue against his tanned skin, and a thin scar ran along his jawline. He carried himself with the quiet authority of a man used to commanding respect. "He'll need surgery," she said, "and rest afterward. No riding for at least 2 weeks." Vaughn's expression darkened. "We're due in Cheyenne in 10 days. "Then he stays behind," Penelope said firmly as they reached her clinic. "Unless you prefer to bury him along the trail." Something like surprise, then respect, flickered in Vaughn's eyes. He held the door as his men carried Robbie in. "Do what you need to, madam. I'll cover the costs." For the next 2 hours, Penelope worked to clean and close the wound, sending one of the cowboys to fetch Martha to assist. The young man had lost a significant amount of blood, but was lucky the horn had missed his liver by inches. When she finally emerged from behind the partition that separated her surgery area from the main room, she found Vaughn Yates sitting in a chair, hat in hand, staring at the wall. "He'll live," she said, washing blood from her hands in a basin. "But as I said, he needs rest. At least 2 weeks." Vaughn stood, his tall frame making the small clinic feel even smaller. "I appreciate your help, Mrs. Bennett, Penelope Bennett, Mrs. Bennett. I'll arrange for Robbie to stay. Perhaps one of the local families would be willing to take him in while he recovers." "He can stay here," Penelope said. "I have a spare cot. I'll need to monitor his wound for infection anyway." Vaughn studied her for a long moment. "That's mighty generous. The outfit will compensate you fairly." "I don't need," she began, but he cut her off. "We pay our debts, Mrs. Bennett." Bar Y code. There was something in his tone that brooked no argument, so Penelope simply nodded. "As you wish, Mr. Yates." He settled his hat back on his head. "I'll check on him tomorrow. We'll be in town 3 days, resupplying before the final push to Cheyenne." After he left, Martha emerged from behind the partition, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, well, so that's the famous Vaughn Yates." Penelope arched an eyebrow. "Famous?" Sarah's husband was talking about him at dinner last night. Apparently he's quite the legend in cattle circles. Started as a ranch hand and worked his way up to trail boss, then part owner of the Bar Y. They say he once fought off 6 rustlers single-handed. He seems capable, Penelope allowed, though privately she had noted more than that. Despite his imposing presence, there was a gentleness in how he'd spoken about his injured man, a sense of responsibility that went beyond business. Martha gave her a knowing look. "And handsome, if you don't mind my saying so." Martha. "The man's trail boss is gravely injured and you're matchmaking." "Just making an observation," Martha said innocently. "It's been 3 years since Edward passed, Penny, and you're still young." Penelope shook her head. "I have my work, that's enough for me." But that night, as she checked on young Robbie before retiring, she found herself wondering about Vaughn Yates and what kind of life he led on the endless trails between Texas and Wyoming. The next morning, Penelope was changing Robbie's bandages when Vaughn arrived, bringing a package wrapped in brown paper. "Clothes for the boy," he explained, "and some books. He likes to read when he's not being a damned fool around cattle." Robbie, who was awake but groggy from the laudanum, managed a weak smile. "Not my fault that Longhorn had a grudge, boss." Vaughn's stern expression softened slightly. "You'll live to be stupid another day thanks to Mrs. Bennett here." "She's an angel," Robbie said, his young face earnest. "Hands soft as silk but strong as rawhide when she was sewing me up." Penelope felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. "The fever's down," she told Vaughn. "If we can keep infection at bay, he should recover well." Vaughn nodded, then hesitated. "The men were wondering if you might take a look at a few other ailments. Nothing serious, but we've been on the trail for 2 months. "Of course," Penelope said. "Send them over this afternoon." By midday, a steady stream of cowboys had visited her clinic. Most had minor complaints: saddle sores, a sprained wrist, a tooth that needed pulling, but she treated each with the same careful attention. They were polite to a fault, removing their hats and calling her Madam or Doc, their eyes curious but respectful. It was near sunset when Sarah Davis appeared at her door, her pretty face arranged in a mask of concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "I heard you've been treating the Bar Y men all day. Such dedication." Penelope continued arranging her supplies. "Did you need medical attention, Mrs. Davis?" "Oh no, I just thought I'd stop by and see if you needed any assistance. It must be overwhelming caring for so many men." Her emphasis made the innocent words sound scandalous. "I manage just fine," Penelope replied evenly. Sarah glanced toward the back room where Robbie rested. "And keeping a young man here in your home, people are talking." "People always talk, Mrs. Davis, especially when they have little else to occupy their minds." Sarah's smile tightened. "I'm only concerned for your reputation." "A widow living alone, taking in strange men, an injured boy," Penelope corrected. "Who would have died without medical care? If that damages my reputation, so be it." "You always were peculiar," Sarah said, her pretense at kindness slipping, "even back in Missouri. All those medical books instead of focusing on giving Edward children, and now you're out here playing doctor to cowboys. It's unnatural." Penelope felt a familiar pain twist in her chest, but years of such barbs had taught her to show nothing. "If that will be all, Mrs. Davis, I have patients to tend to." She hadn't heard Vaughn enter through the back door that led to her living quarters, where he'd gone to check on Robbie. But he was there now, his tall frame filling the doorway between the clinic and the back room. "Evening, madam," he said to Sarah. His tone perfectly polite but his eyes cold as winter. Sarah startled, then composed herself, offering Vaughn a dazzling smile. "Mr. Yates, what an honor. My husband mentioned you'd be coming through town. Will you be attending the social at our home tomorrow evening? All the prominent citizens of Willow Creek will be there." "Afraid not, madam. Got a herd to move." His gaze shifted to Penelope, who was staring studiously at her medical supplies. "Mrs. Bennett, I checked on Robbie. He's asking for more of that broth you made." "I'll see to it," Penelope said, grateful for the interruption. Sarah's smile faltered as she realized she was being dismissed. "Well, I should be going. Good evening, Mr. Yates, Mrs. Bennett." After she left, an uncomfortable silence filled the clinic. "Sorry about that," Penelope finally said. "Mrs. Davis is." "I know her type," Vaughn said. "Every town has 1 or 10. He picked up a small bottle from her desk, examining the label. "You really studied medicine back east?" Penelope nodded. "With my father, who was a doctor, and later at a women's medical college in Philadelphia. Not a full degree, they wouldn't allow that, but enough training to be useful out here. More than useful from what I've seen." He set the bottle down carefully. "Robbie told me how the men in town hardly come to you, even though the nearest real doctor is in Laramie." Penelope busied herself with preparing a tray for Robbie. "People are set in their ways. People are fools," Vaughn said bluntly, "and cruel with it." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Penelope felt seen in a way she hadn't in years, not as the barren widow or the strange woman playing at medicine, but simply as herself. The moment broke when Martha burst in, her normally neat hair escaping its pins. "Penny, it's the Taylor girl, Emma. The fever's spiked and she's having convulsions." Penelope was already grabbing her bag. "How long?" "Started about 10 minutes ago. Her mother sent me to fetch you while her father went for the preacher." "Not the preacher, cold water and clean cloths," Penelope said, heading for the door. She paused, looking back at Vaughn. "Can you check on Robbie? There's broth warming on the stove. If his fever rises or the wound looks red, come find me immediately." Without waiting for a response, she hurried out with Martha, leaving Vaughn standing in her clinic, surrounded by the tools of her trade and the faint scent of lavender that seemed to follow her. At the Taylor home, Penelope found chaos. Emma lay on her bed, her small body rigid, her eyes rolled back. Her mother knelt beside her, praying through tears, while her father paced and her younger siblings huddled in a corner, frightened. "Everyone out except Mrs. Taylor," Penelope ordered, her voice calm but firm. When Mr. Taylor hesitated, she added, "Now, please. I need space to work." For the next hour, Penelope fought to bring Emma's fever down. She packed the girl in cool cloths, administered a tincture of willow bark, and spoke soothingly as the convulsions gradually subsided. By midnight, Emma was sleeping normally, her breathing even, the worst of the crisis past. "She'll need to be watched through the night," Penelope told the exhausted parents. "The fever may try to rise again. Keep changing the cool cloths and give her the tincture every 4 hours. Mrs. Taylor clasped her hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Bennett, if we'd lost her." "You didn't," Penelope said gently. "She's strong like her mother." It was past 1 in the morning when Penelope finally trudged back to her clinic, bone-tired and worried about leaving Robbie for so long. To her surprise, a lamp still burned in the front window, and when she opened the door, she found Vaughn seated in a chair beside Robbie's cot, reading aloud from one of the books he'd brought. He looked up when she entered, marking his place with a finger. "Boy's been sleeping on and off. No fever that I could tell." Penelope set down her bag and checked Robbie herself, relieved to find his wound clean and his temperature normal. "Thank you for staying with him," Vaughn shrugged. "Least I could do," he nodded toward the door. "The girl." "She'll recover," Penelope said, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look, with strands of hair falling around her face and her dress damp from tending to Emma. "You didn't have to wait up. I'm sure you have early business tomorrow. Wanted to make sure you got back safe," he said simply. Town's full of cowboys with whiskey in their bellies. The unexpected consideration touched her. Well, I appreciate it, but I'm quite capable of taking care of myself, Mr. Yates. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Never doubted that for a second, Mrs. Bennett. He stood, towering over her in the small room, and for a brief, disorienting moment, Penelope found herself wondering what it would feel like to be held by those strong arms. She quickly banished the thought, attributing it to exhaustion. "Good night, then," she said, stepping back to open the door. Vaughn settled his hat on his head. "Night, Doc," he paused at the threshold. "That woman who was here earlier, what she said about you, it wasn't right." Penelope stiffened. "You heard?" "Enough." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "Don't let folks like that steal your worth." With that, he was gone, leaving Penelope standing in her doorway, watching his tall figure disappear into the darkness. The next day, word of Emma Taylor's recovery spread through town, bringing a steady stream of visitors to Penelope's clinic, not patients, but mothers with children in tow, seeking advice on fevers and coughs, paying in eggs or preserves or freshly baked bread. It was a small victory, though Penelope knew it might be temporary. Frontier memories were short when it came to good deeds, but long for perceived failures. Robbie continued to improve, his youth and good health working in his favor. By afternoon, he was sitting up, complaining of boredom more than pain. "Can't I at least go sit on the porch, Mrs. Bennett?" he pleaded. "I'll die of suffocation in here." Penelope was checking his stitches. "You nearly died of something quite different yesterday." "Another day of rest, then we'll see." Robbie sighed dramatically. "The boss says we're leaving tomorrow without me." "As well he should," Penelope replied. "You're in no condition to ride. But I've never stayed behind before. What if they forget me?" Penelope couldn't help but smile at the young man's earnest worry. "I doubt Mr. Yates is the forgetting type." As if summoned by his name, Vaughn appeared at the door, his hat in his hands. "Afternoon, Mrs. Bennett. How's our patient?" "Recovering well but impatient," she replied. He was just expressing concern about being left behind. Vaughn fixed Robbie with a stern look. "You think I'd leave one of my men for good? What kind of trail boss would that make me?" Robbie had the grace to look embarrassed. "Sorry, boss." "I've arranged for you to stay with the Wilsons, Martha and her husband," Vaughn continued. "Good folks, from what Mrs. Bennett tells me. Once you're fit to ride, you can catch the stage to Cheyenne. We'll be there at least 2 weeks, settling accounts." The relief on Robbie's face was comical. "Thank you, boss." Vaughn turned to Penelope. "Mrs. Wilson's agreed to check his wound daily, but she said to tell you she's no doctor." "I'll show her what to look for," Penelope assured him, "and I'll check on him regularly as well." "Appreciate that." Vaughn hesitated. "Could I have a word, Mrs. Bennett?" Outside, curious, Penelope followed him onto the small porch that fronted her clinic. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street, and the town was busy with the usual mix of locals and cowboys. "I wanted to settle up before we leave tomorrow," Vaughn said, reaching into his vest pocket. "For Robbie's care and the men you treated yesterday." He handed her an envelope that felt thick with bandnotes. Penelope started to protest, but he held up a hand. "It's fair payment for services rendered. Bar Y doesn't take charity." Penelope accepted the envelope with a nod. "Thank you. This will help restock my supplies." Vaughn's gaze swept over her small clinic, then back to her face. "You've carved out something meaningful here. Not everyone could do what you do." "I'm simply doing what I was trained for," she said, though his words warmed her. "Most folks would have given up by now with the kind of talk that follows you." His directness startled her. "Why stay where you're not appreciated?" It was a question Penelope had asked herself many times during lonely nights. "Where else would I go? Besides, there are people here who need me, even if they don't always admit it." Vaughn nodded slowly. "Stubborn." "I prefer determined," she countered, a smile tugging at her lips despite herself. He matched her smile with a small one of his own, transforming his usually stern face. "Fair enough." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the town's activity. Sarah Davis passed by on the opposite boardwalk, her gaze sharp as she noted them together. She gave a tight nod but didn't approach. Your admirers are watching, Vaughn murmured. Penelope sighed. Mrs. Davis will have me married off to some cowboy by sundown in her gossip. Could do worse, Vaughn said lightly. Before Penelope could respond to that unexpected remark, a commotion down the street caught their attention. A wagon had overturned and people were gathering around something or someone on the ground. "Doctor," someone shouted. "Need the doctor." Penelope was already moving, Vaughn right behind her. They reached the scene to find a man pinned beneath the heavy wagon, his face contorted in pain. It was Henry Wilson, Martha's husband. "Penny," Martha cried, kneeling beside her husband. "The wheel broke and it just tipped over on him." Penelope assessed the situation quickly. The wagon had Henry's lower body trapped, and from the angle, she suspected broken bones at minimum, possibly worse internal injuries. "We need to lift this off him," she said, looking around at the gathering men. "Carefully." Vaughn was already organizing the effort. "You men on this side, steady now on my count. Mrs. Bennett, you tell us when he's clear." The men heaved, and the wagon lifted just enough for Penelope to help pull Henry clear. His right leg was clearly broken, the bone pushing against the skin though not breaking through. "Get him to my clinic," she ordered. "Gently now." As the men carried Henry, Martha clutched Penelope's arm. "Is he going to be all right? The children, I'll do everything I can," Penelope promised. "Go to your children now, tell them their father's hurt but being cared for. Then come to the clinic." In the controlled chaos that followed, Penelope was grateful for Vaughn's steady presence. He kept the curious onlookers at bay, fetched clean water when she needed it, and didn't flinch when she had to set Henry's broken leg, a procedure that made grown men pale. Henry had been lucky, all things considered. Besides the broken leg, he had bruised ribs and a gash on his head, but no signs of the internal bleeding Penelope had feared. "He'll need to stay off that leg for at least 6 weeks, she told Martha that evening, after Henry had been stabilized and given laudanum for the pain. "Which means the store." Martha's face fell. "The store is our livelihood. With Henry laid up, I don't know how we'll manage. I can run it, but I can't do the heavy lifting, stocking shelves, unloading deliveries." "I can stay," Robbie offered from his cot. "I mean, I'll be here anyway, and once I'm on my feet, I can help out. I worked in my pa's store before I took to cowboying." Martha looked touched but uncertain. "That's very kind, but it's settled then," Vaughn said. His trail boss voice Penelope had come to recognize, the one that closed a matter. "Robbie will help at the store while he recovers. His wages will continue." He glanced at the young cowboy. "Consider it your new assignment, just temporary." Robbie nodded eagerly. "Yes, boss." After Martha left to check on her children and get clothes for Henry, Penelope found herself alone with Vaughn in the front room of the clinic. "That was generous," she said quietly, washing blood from her hands. "Continuing his wages." Vaughn leaned against the wall, watching her. "Man gets hurt doing his job, he gets paid until he's well. That's always been my policy." He paused. "Besides, it solves 2 problems at once. The Wilsons need help and Robbie needs something to keep him out of trouble while he heals." "You care about your men," Penelope observed. "They're my responsibility." Vaughn straightened up. "I should let you rest. It's been a long day and you've got 2 patients to look after now. 3, actually," Penelope corrected. "Emma Taylor still needs checking on. I was about to head over there when the accident happened." Vaughn frowned. "When was the last time you slept, Mrs. Bennett?" The question caught her off guard. Last night, and eaten," Penelope tried to remember. "Martha brought bread this morning." Vaughn shook his head. "Sit down, I'll be back." Before she could protest, he was gone, his long strides carrying him quickly down the street. Penelope was too tired to argue, so she sank into her chair, suddenly aware of the bone-deep weariness that had settled into her body. 20 minutes later, Vaughn returned with a covered tray. "From the hotel dining room, owner owed me a favor." The smell of hot food made Penelope's stomach growl embarrassingly loud. Vaughn set the tray before her, a hearty stew, fresh bread, and a slice of apple pie. Thank you," she said, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gesture. "Eat," he said. "I'll check on your patience." As Penelope ate, realizing only then how famished she'd been, she heard Vaughn's deep voice from the back rooms, speaking quietly to first Henry, then Robbie. There was something soothing about his presence, a calm assurance that problems could be solved, wounds healed, burdens shared. When he returned, she had finished most of the stew and was contemplating the pie. "Both resting comfortably," he reported. "Now, what about Emma Taylor?" "I should go check on her," Penelope said, setting down her spoon. "I'll walk with you," Vaughn said. It wasn't a request. The night air was cool as they walked to the Taylor home, the stars brilliant overhead in the clear Wyoming sky. Penelope was acutely aware of Vaughn beside her, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the moonlight. "You're leaving tomorrow," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "At first light," he confirmed. "Long push to Cheyenne ahead." Penelope nodded, trying to ignore the small pang of disappointment she felt. It was foolish. She barely knew this man, and his life was on the trail, moving from place to place with the seasons and the cattle. "The Bar Y comes through Willow Creek twice a year," Vaughn said, as if reading her thoughts. "Spring and fall drives." "I'll look after Robbie until he's well enough to travel," she assured him. Vaughn stopped walking, turning to face her. "That's not why I mentioned it." Penelope's heart did an odd little skip. "Oh, I'd like to call on you when I return in the fall, properly." His blue eyes held her steadily in the moonlight. If that would be welcome. The directness of his proposal left her momentarily speechless. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her as a woman rather than as a widow or a curiosity. "Mr. Yates, you hardly know me," she finally managed. "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you're skilled and brave and stubborn determined," he corrected with a small smile. "I know you face down gossips without flinching, and that you'd go without sleep or food to help someone in need." His words touched something deep within her, a place that had been hollow and aching for longer than she cared to admit. "I would be pleased to receive your call, Mr. Yates," she said softly. Something in his face relaxed, a tension she hadn't even noticed until it was gone. "Vaughn," he said. "My name is Vaughn, Penelope," she offered in return. He nodded once, as if sealing a pact. "Penelope." They continued to the Taylor home, where Penelope found Emma much improved, her fever broken and her color returning. As Penelope examined the girl, she was aware of Vaughn watching from the doorway, his expression thoughtful. Later, as he walked her back to her clinic under the vast canopy of stars, Penelope found herself wondering what life might hold between now and the fall, when the Bar Y would return to Willow Creek and Vaughn Yates would come calling. The morning brought a flurry of activity as the Bar Y outfit prepared to leave town. Penelope, who had risen early to check on her patients, stood on her porch watching the cowboys gather their horses and make final preparations. Vaughn found her there, his horse saddled and ready behind him. He'd exchanged his everyday clothes for full trail gear leather chaps, a bandana around his neck, and a well-worn duster. "Robbie's settled with the Wilsons," he said. "Martha's already treating him like a son," Penelope smiled. "She has that way about her. Henry's resting comfortably, and I've left instructions for his care." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, neither quite knowing how to say goodbye after their brief but meaningful connection. "Well," Vaughn finally said, "Yes, of course," Penelope replied quickly. "Safe travels, Mr. Vaughn." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Something for you. Don't open it until we're gone." Penelope accepted it, surprised by the weight of the small parcel. "Thank you." Vaughn's eyes held hers for a long moment. Then, in a gesture that caught her completely off guard, he took her free hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Until fall, Penelope Bennett," he said softly. Before she could respond, he was mounting his horse and riding toward the gathered herd and cowboys. Penelope stood on her porch, the package clutched in her hand, and watched until the last rider disappeared from view. Only then did she unwrap the brown paper, revealing a small brass compass, beautifully crafted and obviously well cared for. A note accompanied it, written in a surprisingly elegant hand. To help you find your way, though I suspect you rarely get lost. It was my father's. Like you, he knew his direction in life. V.Y. Penelope traced the compass with her fingertip, touched beyond words by the personal nature of the gift. It was something a man carried on the trail, a vital tool for survival, and he had entrusted it to her. She tucked it into her pocket, feeling its reassuring weight against her hip as she went to check on Henry Wilson. For the first time in years, Penelope felt a flicker of something she had almost forgotten: hope. The weeks following the Bar Whiteca's departure brought changes to Willow Creek and to Penelope's place within it. Word of how she'd saved Emma Taylor and treated Henry Wilson spread, and gradually, more townsfolk began coming to her clinic. Some still regarded her warily, and Sarah Davis continued her whispered campaign against the unnatural woman doctor, but Penelope found the daily slights easier to bear. Robbie, true to his word, proved invaluable to the Wilsons. Once he was well enough to move about, he took over the heavy work at the store, charming customers with his easy manner and Texas drawl. More than once, Penelope caught young women finding reasons to visit the general store, blushing when the handsome young cowboy offered to help them find exactly what they needed. "You've become quite the favorite with the ladies of Willow Creek," Penelope teased him one evening as she checked his healing wound. Robbie grinned sheepishly. "Just being friendly, Mrs. Bennett. Boss would tan my hide if I caused any trouble here. How is your boss?" Penelope asked, trying to sound casual. "Have you had word from the outfit?" "Got a letter last week," Robbie said. "They made it to Cheyenne on schedule. Boss asked after you wanted to know if you were keeping me in line." Penelope smiled, ignoring the small thrill that ran through her at the mention of Vaughn's inquiry. "And are you staying in line, Robbie?" "Yes, madam," he said earnestly. "Been saving my wages too. Boss says I might make trail cook next season if I keep my nose clean." June turned to July and July to August. Henry Wilson's leg healed slowly but properly, and by mid-August he was able to get around with the help of a cane. Robbie, fully recovered, had become indispensable to the Wilsons, who offered him a permanent position at the store. "Boss says I should take it," Robbie told Penelope one day as he helped her carry supplies into her clinic. "Says cowboying's a young man's game and I've got a good opportunity here." Penelope was arranging bottles on her shelves. "And what do you think?" Robbie scratched his head. "I like it here. The Wilsons treat me like family and I'm putting money aside. Maybe in a few years I could have my own store." He looked around the clinic. "Though I'll miss the outfit and the boss. When do you expect him back?" Penelope asked, the question that had been on her mind for weeks finally finding voice. "First week of October if the weather holds," Robbie said. "They'll bring the fall herd down from Montana, stop here for supplies before heading to Texas for the winter." October seemed both too far away and too soon. Penelope had taken to carrying Vaughn's compass in her pocket each day, a talisman of sorts, though she told herself it was merely appreciation for a thoughtful gift. September brought the first hint of autumn to Wyoming, the aspen trees turning gold against the evergreens. Penelope found herself increasingly busy as children returned to school and promptly shared whatever illnesses they'd cultivated over the summer. It was during this busy time that Sarah Davis's youngest child, 4-year-old Clara, fell ill with a high fever and rash. Despite their history, Daniel Davis came to Penelope's clinic in the middle of the night, his face drawn with worry. "My wife didn't want me to come," he admitted as Penelope gathered her supplies. "But Doc Miller's still away in Laramie and Clara's burning up." Penelope set aside her personal feelings. "I'll need to see her right away." At the Davis home, Sarah met her with a cold stare but stepped aside to let her examine Clara. The little girl was indeed dangerously ill, her small body radiating heat, angry red spots covering her torso. "Scarlet fever," Penelope diagnosed, her heart sinking. It was a serious illness that could lead to complications affecting the heart, kidneys, and other organs if not properly treated. She'll need constant care for the next several days. Cool baths to bring down the fever, plenty of fluids, and this tincture every 4 hours. Sarah looked stricken. Is she going to die? The raw fear in the other woman's voice stripped away any pretense. In that moment, she wasn't Penelope's tormentor, she was simply a mother terrified for her child. Not if I can help it, Penelope said firmly, but I'll need to stay here tonight to monitor her condition. To her surprise, Sarah nodded without argument. For the next 3 days, Penelope divided her time between her other patients and the Davis home, catching sleep in short bursts and pushing herself to the limits of endurance. Clara's condition wavered between improvement and setbacks, each hour a battle against the disease that sought to claim her. On the 3rd night, Clara's fever finally broke. Penelope, who had been dozing in a chair beside the child's bed, woke to find Sarah watching her, an unreadable expression on her face. Her fever's down, Penelope said, placing a hand on Clara's forehead, and her breathing is easier. Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. You saved her. She's strong, Penelope said, like her mother. Sarah looked away, then back, her composure cracking. Why did you help us? After everything I've said about you, Penelope considered the question seriously. Because she's an innocent child, because I took an oath to heal. And because I know what it's like to want a child so badly it hurts. The words hung in the air between them, more honest than anything they'd ever shared. I didn't know, Sarah said finally, about your husband that you tried to have children. It wasn't something I discussed openly, Penelope replied. But yes, Edward and I tried for years. The doctors eventually told me it was impossible. Sarah looked at her sleeping daughter, then back to Penelope. I can't imagine that pain. I've had 4 healthy children, and each one has been a blessing. They are indeed, Penelope said softly. Which is why I studied medicine to help bring those blessings safely into the world, even if I couldn't have my own. Something shifted in Sarah's expression, not quite acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. You should get some rest, Mrs. Bennett. You look exhausted. It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. As Penelope gathered her things to leave, Sarah spoke again. The Cowboys will be coming through soon. I hear Mr. Yates asked about you in his letters to young Robbie. Penelope felt her cheeks warm. Mr. Yates was kind enough to express interest in calling when he returns. A ghost of Sarah's usual knowing smile appeared. He's quite the catch, from what I hear, property in Texas, part owner of the Bar Y. His financial situation is of no interest to me, Penelope said firmly. Sarah looked skeptical but didn't pursue it. Well, thank you for Clara. Penelope nodded and took her leave, walking home under a sky brilliant with stars, feeling that something fundamental had shifted in Willow Creek, or perhaps within herself. The first week of October arrived with clear skies and cool nights. Penelope found herself checking the roads south of town more often than she cared to admit, watching for the dust cloud that would signal the approach of a cattle herd. You're fretting worse than a cat in a room full of rocking chairs, Martha told her one afternoon as they sat having tea in Penelope's small living quarters. Your hair's fine, your clinic's spotless, and that new dress suits you perfectly. Penelope smoothed her hands over the sage green fabric of the dress she'd ordered from the mercantile. I'm not fretting, I just want to make a professional impression. Martha snorted. Professional, is that what the young people are calling it these days? Martha? Oh, don't Martha me. I've seen how you touch that compass he gave you, like it's made of gold instead of brass. Penelope couldn't deny it. Over the months, Vaughn's compass had become precious to her, a tangible connection to the man who'd seen her value when others hadn't. He may have changed his mind, Penelope said, voicing the fear that had grown as October approached, or met someone else on his travels. Martha patted her hand. If that man's eyes when he looked at you were any indication, he's been counting the days just as you have. 2 days later, the lookout on the edge of town spotted the dust cloud of an approaching herd. Word spread quickly, and by noon, everyone knew the Bar Y outfit was less than 3 hours away. Penelope was treating Mrs. Peterson's gout when Robbie burst into the clinic, his face flushed with excitement. "They're coming, Mrs. Bennett. Just got word from the livery the Bar Y will be here before sundown." Mrs. Peterson gave a knowing smile. "Best finish up with my old foot then, Mrs. Bennett. Sounds like you'll want to freshen up before company arrives." Penelope maintained her professional demeanor, though her heart was racing. "Let's complete your treatment first, Mrs. Peterson. The cattle drive can wait." But as soon as her patient left, Penelope found herself rushing to her quarters, washing her face and hands, changing into the new green dress, and pinning her auburn hair in a style slightly more elaborate than her usual severe bun. She told herself it was simply proper to look presentable when receiving a caller, even as she added a drop of lavender oil at her wrists and throat. The compass, as always, was in her pocket. The sun was beginning its descent when the first riders appeared on Main Street. Penelope watched from her clinic window as cowboys in dust-covered clothes rode in, their faces weathered and tired from the long drive. She searched for Vaughn's tall figure among them but didn't see him. An hour passed, and then another. Penelope busied herself with reorganizing supplies that didn't need reorganizing, trying to tamp down her growing disappointment. Perhaps he wasn't with this drive. Perhaps he'd stayed in Texas or gone elsewhere. The knock, when it finally came, was so soft she almost missed it. Penelope opened the door to find Vaughn Yates standing on her porch, hat in hand, his blue eyes searching hers. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face more deeply tanned, a new small scar near his temple. But his eyes, those were exactly as she recalled, clear and direct, and somehow both stern and kind. "Penelope," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. "Vaughn," she replied, suddenly unable to think of anything more eloquent. "You're here." A smile lifted one corner of his mouth. "Said I would be." They stood looking at each other, months of letters unwritten but thoughts preserved hanging in the air between them. "Would you like to come in?" she finally asked. "Or we could walk. It's a lovely evening." "A walk would be nice," Vaughn said. "Been in the saddle for weeks." They strolled through town as the day faded into dusk, nodding to townsfolk who watched with undisguised interest. Vaughn told her about the summer drive, the new calves born in spring, the ranch in Texas where he spent the winters. "And you?" he asked as they reached the small bridge that spanned the creek at the edge of town. "Robbie wrote that you've been busy." Penelope told him about Emma Taylor's recovery, Henry Wilson's healing leg, and even little Clara Davis's battle with scarlet fever. "Things have changed since you left," she admitted. "People are more accepting of my practice now." "Good," Vaughn said firmly. "About time they recognized what they have in you." They stopped on the bridge, leaning against the railing to watch the water flow beneath them, golden in the last light of day. "I thought about you," Vaughn said suddenly. "Out on the trail, at night looking at the stars, I wondered if you were seeing the same ones." The simple confession touched Penelope deeply. "I kept your compass with me," she admitted, "every day." Vaughn turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "I'm not a man who speaks easily about feelings, Penelope, never have been, but these months away, they've made some things clear to me." Penelope's heart quickened. "What things?" "That I want a life that's more than just the trail. That I want someone to come home to." His eyes held her steadily. "That I want that someone to be you." The directness of his declaration took her breath away. "Vaughn, we barely know each other." "I know what matters," he said simply. "I know you're brave and skilled and compassionate. I know you fight for what's right, even when it costs you. I know I've never met a woman like you, and I don't expect to again." Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes. "There are things you should understand about me, about why people here treated me as they did." Vaughn waited, his expression open. "I can't have children," she said, the words still painful even after all these years. "The doctors were quite certain if you're looking for a family—" "I'm looking for you," Vaughn interrupted gently. "Just you, Penelope." "But a family, there are children who need homes," he said. "If that's something you want, or maybe just us would be enough." But don't think for 1 second that your worth to me depends on whether you can bear a child." Penelope felt something break free inside her, a knot of shame and inadequacy that had bound her for so long. "I don't know what to say." Vaughn took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "You don't have to say anything now. I'm here for a week before we take the herd south to Texas. Just think about it." As they walked back toward town in the gathering darkness, hand in hand, Penelope knew she didn't need a week. The answer was already forming in her heart, clear as the stars emerging overhead. The next morning, Vaughn called formally at Penelope's clinic, dressed in his best clothes, his hair still damp from washing. They walked together to the general store, where Robbie greeted his former boss with an enthusiastic handshake. "Store looks good," Vaughn said, nodding approvingly at the neat displays and well-stocked shelves. "Wilson treating you right." "Better than right, boss," Robbie said, grinning, "even talking about partnership down the line." As they continued their tour of the town, people nodded respectfully to Vaughn, and Penelope noticed how Sarah Davis, standing outside the millinery, gave them a considering look before offering a polite nod. "Word travels fast in a small town," Penelope murmured. "Something wrong with people knowing I'm calling on you?" Vaughn asked, his arm brushing hers as they walked. "No," she said, realizing she meant it. "Nothing wrong with that at all." Their week together passed in a blur of shared meals, long walks, and conversations that stretched into the night. Vaughn told her about his childhood in Texas, the parents he'd lost to fever, his years working his way up from ranch hand to trail boss to part owner. Penelope shared stories of her father's medical practice, her studies in Philadelphia, her marriage to Edward, and the grief when they realized they would never have children. "He was a good man," she said as they sat on her porch on their 5th evening together. "He never made me feel less because I couldn't give him a child, but I felt it myself, especially after he died, as if I'd failed him somehow." Vaughn's hand covered hers. "You didn't fail anyone, Penelope. Some things just aren't meant to be." "And some things are," she said softly, looking into his eyes. The day before the Bar Y was scheduled to leave for Texas, Vaughn took Penelope on a picnic outside of town. They rode to a small bluff overlooking the valley, where autumn had painted the landscape in gold and crimson. As they ate the lunch Martha had packed for them, Vaughn seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous, a state Penelope had never associated with the confident trail boss. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked. Vaughn set aside his plate and turned to face her. "I've been thinking about tomorrow." "About leaving?" Penelope nodded, the thought of his departure a weight in her chest. "You'll be back in the spring." "That's just it," he said. "I don't want to leave you for 6 months, not again." Hope flared in Penelope's heart. "What are you saying?" Vaughn reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. From it, he extracted a simple gold band with a small sapphire. "I'm saying I love you, Penelope Bennett. I'm saying I want to marry you if you'll have me. I'm saying we could go to Texas together or stay here or go anywhere you want. I just don't want to be without you anymore." Tears blurred Penelope's vision as joy swept through her. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you." Vaughn's face transformed with a smile more brilliant than any she'd seen from him. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then cradled her face in his hands, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I first saw you running toward Robbie with that medical bag of yours." Penelope laughed, happiness bubbling up inside her. "I thought you were the most intimidating man I'd ever met. And now—" She kissed him again, savoring the feel of his arms around her. "Now I know you're the best man I've ever met." They were married 3 days later in the small church in Willow Creek. The Bar Y outfit delayed their departure south, none of the cowboys willing to miss their boss's wedding. Martha stood up for Penelope and Robbie for Vaughn. To Penelope's surprise, nearly the entire town turned out for the ceremony. Even Sarah Davis attended, bringing little Clara, now fully recovered, who presented Penelope with a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Thank you for saving her," Sarah said quietly as Penelope accepted the flowers. "And I'm sorry for before." Penelope nodded, acknowledging both the gratitude and the apology. "She's a beautiful child, you're very blessed." "We all are," Sarah said, with a glance toward Vaughn, who was accepting congratulations from townspeople. In different ways. After the ceremony, as friends and neighbors celebrated with a feast in the town square, Vaughn pulled Penelope aside, his expression serious. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something I should have mentioned before." Concern flickered through Penelope. "What is it? In Texas, at my ranch, there's a boy, 10 years old. Matthew. His mother worked as a cook for us, but she died last winter, consumption. I've been looking after him since, but he needs more than a bachelor trail boss can provide." Penelope's heart quickened with understanding. "You want us to raise him?" Vaughn nodded. "If you're willing, he's a good boy, smart, loves horses and books almost equally. Reminds me of myself at that age, except he's got a better start than I did." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes for the second time that day. "You already had a child in mind when we talked about family." "I didn't want to pressure you," Vaughn said. "And if it's too much, too soon," Penelope silenced him with a kiss, not caring who saw. When she pulled back, she said, "Tell me about our son, Vaughn. Tell me everything." Later, as the celebration continued around them, Martha found Penelope watching Vaughn deep in conversation with Henry Wilson. "Happy?" Martha asked, linking her arm through Penelope's. "More than I ever thought possible," Penelope admitted. "We leave for Texas tomorrow. Vaughn has a ranch there and a boy who needs a mother." Martha's eyes widened, then filled with tears. "Oh, Penny, how perfect. I'm scared," Penelope confessed. "What if I'm not good at it, being a mother?" "Nonsense," Martha said firmly. "You've been mothering this entire town since you arrived. One boy will be easy by comparison." As the sun set on Willow Creek, casting long golden shadows across the town square, Vaughn found his way back to Penelope's side. His arms slid around her waist, and she leaned into his solid warmth. "Ready to go home?" he asked softly. Penelope looked up at him, this man who had seen her true worth when others couldn't or wouldn't, who had offered her not just love but family, who had, in every sense, saved her as surely as she had saved others. "Yes," she said, her heart full. "I'm ready." 2 years later, Penelope sat on the porch of their Texas ranch, watching as Vaughn taught Matthew to rope a training post. At 12, the boy was tall for his age, with his adoptive father's serious demeanor but a ready smile that reminded Penelope of Robbie. Beside her in a cradle, 6-month-old Sarah Wilson Yates slept peacefully, the daughter they had adopted after her 16-year-old mother had died in childbirth on a neighboring ranch. Penelope had delivered the baby and, with Vaughn, had offered to raise her when no family came forward. In her lap was a letter from Martha, full of news from Willow Creek. Robbie was now a full partner in the general store. Emma Taylor was engaged to the blacksmith's son. The town had finally hired a proper doctor, but he worked alongside Penelope whenever she and Vaughn brought the children to visit during the spring cattle drive. Life had unfolded in ways Penelope could never have predicted that day when she ducked behind a water trough as gunfire echoed through Willow Creek. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but it had led her here to a home filled with love, to a family created by choice rather than blood, to a husband who saw her completeness rather than what she lacked. Vaughn finished the roping lesson and sent Matthew to care for the horses. He crossed the yard to the porch, his hat tipped back, his face weathered but handsome in the afternoon sun. "How are my girls?" he asked, leaning down to kiss Penelope and peer at the sleeping baby. "Perfect," Penelope said, reaching for his hand. "Everything is perfect." Vaughn settled beside her on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders. "Been thinking about what you said, about taking on another child." The orphanage in the nearby town had 3 siblings ages 4, 6, and 8 whose parents had died of typhoid. Penelope had visited them last week and hadn't been able to stop thinking about their solemn faces. "Are we crazy to consider it?" she asked. "5 of us in this house already." Vaughn looked out at the ranch that had prospered under his care at the home they had built together. "Maybe a little crazy," he admitted with a smile, "but the best kind." Penelope leaned against him, content in a way she had once thought impossible. "People back in Willow Creek used to mock me for the child I couldn't have," she said softly. "They thought it made me less somehow." Vaughn's arm tightened around her. "Their loss. Look what they missed out on the chance to really know you." Penelope thought of Sarah Davis's apology, of the respect she'd earned in town, of the lives she'd touched with her medical skills. Some of them figured it out eventually. "Smart folks," Vaughn said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But I knew from the start." "Knew what?" Penelope asked, though she already knew the answer, had heard it on their wedding night and many times since. Vaughn smiled, the expression transforming his usually stern face into something boyish and tender. "That you didn't need to give birth to be a mother. That you saved me instead, saved me from a life alone on the trail, from never knowing what it meant to come home to love." As the Texas sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Penelope Yates watched her family, the one she had found rather than born, and knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true place in the world. Not despite what she lacked, but because of everything she had to give.